Going to be doing today is imagining that we've exported a bunch of data either from Marketo or Hubspot or whatever marketing automation platform you use. A lot of the CRMs have a little bit better reporting built in. So some of this you can do a little bit natively in the reporting in the CRM platforms. But for this, let's imagine we've exported a bunch of data and we need to do some data analysis using pivot tables. So I've got some data here and I included a column for ID because that's a very likely table that will, or column that will be in your table when you export it. So what I'm going to do is to analyze all of this data. I'm going to bring my cursor into column A1 and then I'm going to go to insert pivot table. And it's going to give me a choice here of the data range. So if I want to limit the range and I only want to use like just a couple rows or a couple columns, I can do it here. But for the most part, I like to have all of the rows and all of the columns to make it make sense. And the easiest place to do this is in a new sheet. Today, we're going to be using Google Sheets to do this. The functions are very similar in Microsoft Excel. So if you're not using Google Sheets and you're using Excel, a lot of this will be transferable. Some of the words will be slightly different. But let's do something pretty simple. So what you'll notice here is we've got the pivot table editor. And in the far right column, you'll have a list of all of the columns that you have available. It's just the column headers here. And so we're going to do a really simple one. We're going to analyze our database by industry. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the value of industry over into rows. And so what that did is it took all of the values that are in the industry. My sample data is only 75 rows, but you can do this with tens of thousands of rows. And so it gets a lot simpler. So our numbers will be small, but the principles are the same. So what you can see is we have here all of the various values that are in the industries. Hopefully this matches the pick list that you have in your marketing automation platform or CRM. But on its own, it doesn't give us much information. So now what we want to do is we want to know how many people are in our database per industry. So in order to do that, there's a bunch of different ways you could do it. You could count it by any column. I have a tendency just to count it by the ID. And so if you'll notice when it pops up, it pumps up a bunch of numbers. And so I don't want to sum the ID. I want to know how many people are being counted. So this is how many people per industry. And so what you'll see here is I've got 2 people with charity as the industry, 1 person with charitable goods. I have some people with missing industries. And so I actually like to change the font around because I'm a font snob, I guess. I don't know. I just like something a little bit different than Arial. I often move this down just a little bit, and I like to put titles up here because when you're sharing this data, it's not always easy. I mean, it's pretty easy here. It just says industry and counted by D, but I'll do database by industry. And so that's an easy way because we're going to be doing lots of pivot tables in this exact sheet today. It's a good way to have this set up. And so what we've got here is we've got the industry values and the number of people. But let's suppose I want to know like what percentage of my database is. So I can actually drag another column. So I'm going to bring ID down again. This is going to seem counterintuitive. And what you'll see is, once again, it defaulted to sum. I'm going to change it to count. So what I have here is 2 of the exact same rows. But I want to show this second row. And instead of showing it as the number, I want to show it as the percent of the grand total. And so what you can see here is total 75 people. And then I've got 100 of the database. Now, I don't need to have 2 decimal points for this. I want to make it a little simpler. So I'm going to sort it this way. So I've moved it down to just the percentage, and I can see this. Now, if I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is all well and good, but I'd really like to know which industries have the most people, I can actually change how we sort this row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort it in descending, and that just did it alphabetically. So instead of sorting by industry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort by the second column. And so now I'm sorting by the highest values first down to the lowest values. So this can be a really easy way to do things. Now, something that we're often asked to do in marketing is to understand our database by source. So what I've done is I just copied this whole pivot table and then I pasted it right here. Now, a little trick with Google Sheets is close that for just 1 second because you want to edit this table. So I want to be able to make sure I get the edit here. So no more do I want to do database by industry. I would like to do database by source. And so I've changed that. And now instead of looking by industry, I'm going to do it by lead source. And so it changed the values again. So I can change the sorting, you can do it ascending or descending. And this is really helpful to have the percentage. But I'm going to add some different layers here. So I can see the percentage by social, by event, whatever. But I'd actually like to know a little bit deeper information. I want to know which social platforms, which search platforms. So I'm going to get rid of the ID here. I'm just going to keep the column. And so I can change it again to make descending. Sometimes you do have to change that a little bit. And then now what I want to do is I want to add another layer. I want to know lead source details. And so instead of just dragging it over and replacing it there, so if it turns green, that indicates you're about to replace it, you can go underneath it and you can add detailed columns. And if you'll notice, we have percentages here. It actually has nothing to do with the pivot table itself, the data. It has to do with how we have it formatted because we prior had that column sorted as a percentage. And so I'm going to change it here to just be a number. And so we can, just like we do in any other Google Sheet, we can double click the column to make it go with. So what this enables me to do is I can see the various social, I can see Instagram, LinkedIn. I mean, this is all fake data that I made up for this. We've got some MySpace, some TikTok, we've got some old events, but this gives you the whole big thing. You'll also notice that we have some where we don't have lead source details. And you'll notice that that's under direct. And I think we had it for CRM up top here. So we didn't have any data in that column. So there's nothing else to display. You can hide these columns too. Like if you just wanted to expand here. So let's say I'm really focused on, I want to know just about my social platform. So I'm going to expand paid social. And I'm going to expand social. And so I can see there Instagram and not. One thing you can do, which it wouldn't make sense totally for lead source, but if we imagine here, is you can swap these. So like imagine you're working on your paid search or your social, and you want to go like from Instagram, how much was just regular social and how much is paid social, just swapping them around. So you have a lot of flexibility to analyze data with these. Now, this was a really good way to just make an assessment of the data. But let's imagine we're doing something for a little bit more insight. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to copy this table. I have a tendency to leave like 2 or 3 columns in between my tables because if you start adding rows to your pivot table, it will overwrite the columns that you have. So I'm going to paste it again. And again, I'm going to close this down because what happens is it remembers the table I just pasted. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to click edit. And so now, instead of doing database by industry, I'm going to look at success by channel. And so how are we going to do this? We'll call it success by channel. Let's put in here lead source. Because sometimes we'll be using the terminology by channel. And what's happening is we're using the field lead source. And that's why having these additional information here. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add lead source there. I'm going to, right now, before I do anything, I'm going to change this back to just automatic. I don't need it to be a percentage. I'm going to get rid of this column. So we're right back to where we were. We had success by channel. Now, we also have here a lead status field. So what we did in the last one is we dragged it under. So when we were looking at lead source and lead source details, we kind of did it as another layer. That's how I think of these things, like a deeper layer. But that's not necessarily the most useful way here. I think what can be helpful is that when you have a very finite set of values, so for example, you can see we have known, engaged, MQL. I can actually add this as columns, and that allows me to create a matrix value here. And so we can see lead status, we can see all of the channels, we can see how many people from each channel are sitting at the various things at the various stages here. Now, because we have strange orientations with numbers and letters, it can be helpful to select this. I'm selecting the whole column. You could just select this data, and I'm going to change the alignment, and I'm going to make it centered, and it makes it a little bit easier to tell here. And so what I want to do is I'm imagining that this is records that were created last year or whatever assessment I've done. And I know that I want to find out MQL, SAL, and SQL. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight this table a little bit. And I'm going to say this here in this data is what I'm really going to count as success. I recognize customer might be success, but let's keep it pretty simple for this example. Now you've got this information here. The counts themselves aren't necessarily as useful. So if you remember, we had the opportunity to, instead of showing as a count, we can show as a percentage. And so instead of here, default, and instead of doing the grand total, what I'm going to do here is the row, if this makes sense. And so once again, I will come in here and I will change the format so that I have less decimal points to make it easy. So what this is saying is for organic search, 14 plus 14 plus 14 plus 43 plus 40, 14 ends up to 100. So what this is telling me with this matrix table and percentages is when someone comes in from a certain lead source, what are the likelihood they're going to be successful? And since we've called for this success being MQL, SAL, or SQL, I can easily see. Now, imagine for a second, I don't really care about SAL and SQL, or excuse me, MQL and SAL. I just want to know the SQLs. I just want to know for our business, did we call it did they make it to an opportunity? So if I change fill color, I can just click reset. And I can see here, very simple, that the highest percentage comes from social through this data. I'm going to back that up a second. The other thing that can be really helpful sometimes is you may wish to use this data in a little bit deeper. So since I gave the example of 3 different statuses being a success stage, I can actually use this data in formulas. So I can say equals sum of this row, and I can put a new headline, percent success. Probably should be success percent. And so I can see here, and I can paste this channel, it's pulling in all of the success in this additional row. Now, this data is outside the pivot table. So if I rearrange this or change things, this will not move with it. It's kind of a fixed thing out here, but it's one of those things that you'll find can be a helpful tool to do. So this helped us get some insight. Let's go back to our really simple pivot table. I'm just doing the database by industry. I'm copying, I'm scooting all the way over to the right, and I'm going to paste it here. All right. So let's imagine we need to do some data cleanup. And so we want to know our database by state. And so I'm going to come here, I'm going to change database by state. And as we mentioned, you just kind of drag it over. You can drag it over. See, when I mentioned that sometimes you want to close and then go back in, you can see why. It just picked up the last pivot table I was working on. So I'm going to undo. I'm going to close this. Now I've got everything back here. And now I can come and edit this one. All right, so we're going to drag the state here. And so we can see our database by state. And I noticed that we're missing a lot of states in this one. So I'm going to get rid of this percentage. I am going to say well, maybe not everybody's from the United States. Maybe we have some different countries in here. And so I'm going to drag country over. And instead of going underneath, I'm going to go above it because that's the bigger layer. That's the bigger bucket. So I can see here that we have some people from the UK, we have people from the United States, and we have people from USA. And again, the formatting changed. So I'm going to just change that. And I'm going to go to automatic. Now, let's suppose here we have lots of countries listed. I mean, this is a pretty simple table, but let's imagine we have lots of countries listed. I can actually filter out here. And so I can pull the country in here, and it gives me the opportunity. Right now it's showing all items, but I can come here just like I would do in a row, and I would say I've got the United States and I've got the USA. And now I have all of that. And since I'm filtering for the country, I can actually get rid of the country there. Now, I can see that I have CAILIN. So if I prefer to have a 2-digit code for the state, I want to make sure that these outliers are fixed. Now, if you remember, what we've done is we've exported the data from our system. So changing it on this table or this file doesn't do much. What we really care about is making sure that we're changing it in the system. But in order to help us prepare to change for the system, what I want to come in here is I want to take a look, and I can see Illinois and New York. And so I'm going to go back into here, and I'm going to come into my column, and I'm going to filter, and I'm going to clear them out, and I'm going to say I only really need to look at Illinois and New York. All right. And then in order to help make it easy to assess what I need to do, I can actually add a column here. I add columns all the time to help me either write notes or group data, whatever it might be. But I'm going to name this column Fix Correct State. And so these people that are New York, they should be NY. I'm just going to copy and paste that. And then these people that are Illinois should be IL. And I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste that. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you what happens when you add a new row, I can come back and I can see here that I only need to have the correct state for the ones that are incorrect. So I'm going to go back to the pivot table, and I'm looking here at the database by state, and I'm clicking on this table, and you'll notice, maybe you probably didn't notice because we didn't dig in, is it's expanded one row. It's been a little wider because I touched that correct state into the internal. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to filter it in here, and I'm going to say correct state. Now I only have some values that have correct state. So what I can do is I can either add another filter, like I have the opportunity to add multiple filters, or I can get rid of the country. I'm just going to get rid of the country here, and I'm going to show you what you can do. So if I don't care about the blank ones, like I don't need to worry about the columns that don't need to be fixed. I need to worry about the ones that do need to be fixed. So I'm going to turn the blank ones down. And so what I can see is Illinois and New York. And so I can write notes here. Change Illinois to IL. Change, I'm just going to NY. Now, this is, when you're looking at a small table, it's kind of silly, right? Like, and we would maybe know that like all states we get rectified. So like, think of this as being really useful when you're looking at something like an industry pick list. And maybe what you've discovered is that you have a form out there that has some old pick list values. And so you might know that previously we used to use an industry of hospitals, but we've changed that now to medical. So you make these notes. But what this does is it tells you what data needs to be fixed, and you can make a note here. And so this is all the type of stuff that you can do with pivot tables. And what's awesome about it is like once you have these tables built, you can just start, you can copy and paste, and you can come in here and I can keep, let's see, insert, all right. I'm going to, copy this and paste this. I have the opportunity to just keep going. And so I can look by lead status, and I can come up here and I can, I told you it'll kind of change things around sometimes, but I hate when it does that. So come here, close, great example, edit, get the correct state gone. Let's add lead status. Let's get rid of the filters. And so I've got all of this information about that, and I can again sort it. I can sort by count of ID, descending, and I can see like most people in my database are engaged. So hopefully this gets you running with pivot tables. If you ever have any questions, just DM me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help. These are really fun ways to analyze your data, and I hope you learned something useful today. Thanks.